Welcome back to On the Mind. I'm Austin.
I am Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
I can't believe we're all together again, right before Christmas,
The band is back together.
Boys are back in town.
Don't start. We're not gonna put that into the. Okay, I'm not gonna edit.
Are there copyright laws?
There
on
are
that?
copyright
Right.
laws, and we don't break the law here often. At least not on while we're recording. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Wow, what a convoluted way to say we don't really care about the economy much, which I'm sure we're all going to get into. This is a mixed bag. Just before Duncan goes off a little bit, he's getting red. He wants to talk really bad.
He's looking like the logo of the...
If you aren't aware, if you've been living under a rock,
Indians.
Republicans are now the majority in the House, the Senate, and they have the presidency, kind of, if you count Donald Trump to be a Republican, which debatable. I don't know that he's even human. Republicans are red, but he is definitely orange. Can we
There you
all
go.
just admit that?
That's
Okay.
a good one.
Okay.
What party would be yellow? It's the Libertarians.
Libertarians, all right.
Gary Johnson with that big yellow
we're gonna get
tie
into
and his
this.
jeans.
But for a little background, let's just go to our local Duncan. My favorite bit, by the way.
All right. So obviously, being
Our
a
only
tax...
recurring bit.
Yes, that's true. Being a tax bill, this law has an incredible number of different provisions contained within it, not all of which we're going to be able to hit on the program this evening. However,
dear
some
God.
of the major portions that we should be covering are going to be the reduction of individual tax rates for most tax brackets, the incorporation of the standard deduction and the standard personal exemption into a larger standard deduction, and I think we'll be covering numbers here momentarily, and most particularly the cutting of the corporate tax rate from the current 35% under current United States law, that is as of the time of this recording, during which Donald Trump has not signed the new bill, but it has passed both the House and the Senate.
And he has basically already said this is one of his accomplishments.
Correct. I'm just saying, as of this particular moment during which we are recording, this is not the law of the land.
Fair enough, and I don't think that anyone listening is going to think this is... If not, we should clarify now, this isn't going to affect your taxes for this upcoming tax season.
That is correct.
It's going to be the next...
When you prepare your taxes in 2018 for the year 2017, all of your taxes are going to be covered under the provisions of tax law that are currently in place and have been in place throughout 2017. So, as I was saying regarding the corporate tax rate cut, that rate has gone from 35% under the new plan now to 21%. And there have also been reductions for the price of taxes for pass-through entities, sole proprietorships, partnerships, limited liability corporations, etc. And effectively, that's a 20% deduction on the income that applies on top of then the standard deduction.
Let me jump in while I can here, because I don't have a lot to say, but I can say this. The corporate tax rate, they were going to knock down to 20%, but then they decided that was too drastic. And so they bumped it back up to 21%.
What was the 1% for again? I think it was for Rubio.
So if I may, actually the 1% had a couple of different reasons behind it. Part of it was the Senate's Byrd Rule, which is a procedural rule
That's correct.
that states that no bill can be demonstrated to raise deficits more than 10 years into the future. It was also expanded in order to pay for Marco Rubio's, and Mike Lee of Utah also supported this, expanded child tax credit, which bumped to $2,000.
And let's, if you saw in the news today that, they had to vote on the House bill twice, it was because of congressional rules such as the Byrd
There were
Rule.
3 minor provisions within the conference committee bill. So for those of you who haven't been following this too closely...
And we don't blame you, by the way. We don't.
The House passed its own version of the bill. The Senate passed its own version of the bill. And then what happens is a procedure known as a conference committee, wherein representatives of both the House and the Senate get together and resolve the issues of the bill. The final resolution bill that came out of the conference committee had 3 minor provisions that the Senate parliamentarian did find to violate the Byrd Rule. So the House voted first. They passed it. The Senate voted. They passed a revised bill that changed those 3 provisions. And then it had to go back to the Senate, which also passed those 3 provisions.
Do we
under
know
a
those 3
reconciliation.
provisions?
I'm afraid I don't
off
know
the
them
top
off the
of my
top
head.
of my head.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page there. All right, so let's just talk about straight numbers here. This isn't going to be a recurring bit, by the way.
My favorite part.
Yeah, straight numbers. He doesn't like crooked numbers. Duncan's all about getting those numbers right. All right. Bryce, I see a face, but I don't hear any words coming out your mouth.
No, I was gonna make a joke, but then I thought about it, and then I decided it wasn't worth it, and now I have to.
And now I already know where he's going.
Yeah, I was gonna say something about gay numbers, but see, it wasn't worth it.
Yeah,
Listeners are
hey,
not
you shouldn't
laughing;
have
they have a
Unrelated.
straight face.
shouldn't have
Did you
asked.
hear that Eminem has reportedly used Grindr? Out of his own mouth, he said that.
Really, I didn't know that.
Yes. Anyway,
That's
moving
not
on.
relevant.
Why are we talking about this?
Just because Bryce had to make a joke.
Fair enough.
All right.
Thanks.
So,
Thanks, Eminem.
according to the changes that you're going to see from this tax season to next will be as follows. If you are single, you will be in the 10% tax bracket from no money to $9,325 made.
I'm sorry, Austin. I think you're reading off this year's.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
saying
you were going for next year's
yeah.
numbers.
I'm going to call this first one is from the current one, and then I'm going to go to the next tax bracket. This year, you will pay from $0 to $9,325, 10%. At $9,326 to $37,950, you'll pay 15%.
Are you seriously reading through all of them?
I mean, yeah, why not?
Okay, have a
Should we
pen
just,
with you.
do you think that they would actually care to click a link? Do you think many people would even listen this far into the podcast?
This is
No.
true. We are at this point doing this for our own amusement. Let's go.
All right. So from $37,951 to $91,900, it'll be 25%. $91,000. Okay, above that to $191,650 would be 28%. From there to $416,700%, it would be 33%. And for whatever reason, I never did get a straight one off this. This is the weirdest tax bracket I've ever seen.
Right. There is literally this tiny.
It's like
17, it's a $1,700 tax bracket.
It's less than $2,000.
Correct.
It's at 35%, and then from there on, it's just 39.6%.
Correct.
Under the new provisions, you would pay 10% through $9,525, so that's a $200 increase there that you wouldn't have to pay more on. Then from there to $38,700 be 12%. From there to $82,500%, not percent, dollars, it'd be 22%. From there to $157,500, it'd be 24%. From there to $200,000, it'd be 32%. Thank you for giving me a rounded number there, actually. And then from there to $500,000, it'd be 35%, and anything after that's 37%.
And if I can get a little commentary in here on a few of the changes.
I would prefer you would.
Okay, so a few things that you may have noticed as Austin was reading out this list. One of the most significant changes that you see is actually in the bottom tax brackets. The bottom tax bracket, the very lowest one of 10%, remains more or less unchanged. However, the next two tax brackets have a very interesting structure in that they are both dropped 3% over their previous levels. The next bracket after that goes from 28 to 24%. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting because pretty much universally through the 22% bracket, which again drops from 25 to 22% under this plan, you're looking at more or less reductions across the board. Now, where things do get a little bit interesting is when we get into what's now the 33% bracket and the 32% bracket. The current 33% bracket runs from $191,651 to $416,700. Now, interestingly enough, the new 32% bracket will actually kick in at a significantly lower level than that, at $157,501, ascending to $200,000.
Can I interject there and say that might seem like, hey, that's a smaller, smaller number to a smaller number. Like there's less income that can be in this bracket. However, that encompasses a larger percentage of Americans.
Correct. Now, this is one of those interesting matters in that the 35% now has been expanded, as we commented on as Austin was reading that off. The previous 35% bracket only actually encompassed about $1,700 worth of income. Now, the new $200,000 to $500,000 bracket at 35% encompasses obviously a much, much larger much larger group. So effectively what's happened is that the 32% bracket has been dropped down a little bit. So there are more people who are going to be paying that 32% bracket than were before. And the 35% bracket has been substantially expanded. So several people who were previously at the 33% bracket, so I mean, for instance, let's say you were making in 2017 about $200,000. Previously, that money, the portion of it above $191,651 would have been taxed at 33%. That portion is now going to be taxed instead at 32%, or at 32%. But now anything over the $200,000, if you were to make that in the subsequent year, let's say you got a raise or investments paid off or whatever, that money would now be taxed at 35%.
Conversely, actually, to add on to that, I should say,
Right.
If you make more than $157,501, you'll be paying more overall in taxes no matter what, because you'll be jumping from 28%
That is correct.
to 32%.
And that's actually the largest jump that's included in this tax bill.
Which is insane.
Right.
Yeah, from 24% to 32%. Yes.
No,
right.
no. From 28% to 32%.
Okay. Fair enough. If they were to transfer the numbers completely over, everybody would be getting a tax cut except the 35% mark.
Correct.
Just the way they play with these numbers. And I realize it's over population percentage in these income brackets.
And I mean, the expansion of the 35% bracket is actually fairly self-explanatory in the sense...
You couldn't make it less than $1,700.
Sure. And in the
I don't understand.
And in the sense that $300,000 gap constitutes what's kind of considered the mass affluent, which is basically a demographic referring to people who have, say, a very large income and anywhere between maybe $200,000 to $1 million net worth. So I mean that's kind of the upper share of the mass affluent, just below the actually wealthy. So again, when you're talking about this tax planning context of the Byrd rule, where you do actually have to have it somewhat balanced, even though this does certainly add to the deficit, and I know we're going to get to that shortly.
Oh my God, are we ever?
The 35% expansion is fairly self-explanatory in the sense of being a revenue generating concept, as opposed to having more people taxed at the 32%, who were previously in the 33% bracket.
I genuinely wonder about people that actually listen to us, because we can get really dry sometimes.
I'm probably the worst of us, I know.
No, but I love it because you actually bring facts, and Bryce and I bring feelings.
All the feels.
Do you have anything before I move on to the standard deduction debacle?
No, I'm just here to learn, mostly.
Fair enough. All right, so you might have heard the term, hey, we're doubling the standard deduction, and that is misleading, I think we can say at the very best.
Well,
what they're
now,
doing...
I will have a comment.
They are
on that
adding onto it, don't get me wrong, but they're not doubling it. What they're doing is they're eliminating the personal exemption, adding it to the standard exemption, and they are adding more to
about
that.
$1,600
for single filers.
Correct. Now,
so that'd be about $3,200 for.
Now, one thing I actually do want to point out here.
Well, yeah, it's $3,200 for joint filers like myself.
One thing I do want to point out here is that there is a certain group of people for whom the standard deduction will, in essence, double. And that's going to be like high school students with jobs, college students who still list as dependents on their parents' tax forms, etc., who have part-time jobs on the side. Because those people don't actually get to claim the personal exemption on the basis that they're not claiming themselves as dependent on their own taxes. So this may have some general benefits, actually disproportionate general benefits, to younger people who were, say, in their first jobs. It may have some general benefits in terms of youth unemployment and the income of people who are in that situation. But again, we're talking about a very small portion of the population in that regard.
Also, I think there are other provisions that affect college students that we should get into in another episode.
If I can, I know what you're talking about, the grad school.
That
voucher.
is a small percentage of students.
That actually ended up getting taken out in the conference committee.
Okay,
bill.
I did not know that.
Yeah, grad school vouchers are no longer taxed as standard income.
It's so hard to follow the final bill here. With so much noise, it's hard to follow articles to see exactly what bill they're talking about.
But what we're talking about is a program, so you guys know. a program that would have taxed grad school vouchers, which can run well in excess of $100,000 in technical sticker price, as standard income. Now, of course, college students never see that money because effectively what happens is it's credited toward their tuition by the institution that is asking for their tuition. So in terms of actually having cash in the bank or in the pocket, that money is never seen. However, the original House bill would have taxed that as standard income. Under the conference committee bill, which is the bill that's actually going to the president's desk after the House and Senate respective votes, that is no longer a provision. That goes back to being untaxed.
All right, so since I never actually asked you guys, how do you feel about this bill? Like, how do you feel about short-term perspectives, long-term perspectives for personal and the country? And since you haven't talked much, Bryce, how do you feel?
I think there are pros and cons. So, in 10 years, this is actually going to increase the national deficit by over $1 trillion.
National debt, not national deficit.
That too. But, yes. Anyway.
If the deficit ever goes over $1 trillion, we're really screwed.
Yeah.
You'll see me moving.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so, no, I think it's good. I think we need to cut more spending first. I think people have this weird idea in their mind. They know that if you cut spending, then poor people hurt, but if you cut taxing, then only the rich people gain, and that's not true at all. I can see why people might feel that in their hearts, but if you think with your brains, that's not entirely true. Anyway, I think we should cut more spending before we cut more taxes.
It's a Republican majority in the House and Senate. Are you comfortable with what they are going to cut?
Okay, that's a good point. My next thing is to say none of this really matters anyway, because in a little over 3 years, the Democrats are going to have a majority again, and they are going to hike taxes up way higher than they ever were before.
I disagree with that point because Trump will probably veto it unless they get a supermajority.
Which is
I'm saying in
2020.
Yes, yeah, after, and then no longer will Trump be president. All right, please, guys, do not talk as if Trump will be president.
Actually, at this rate, I think he's going to win
yes,
re-election.
I agree. As long as their strongest choice is Warren or Biden, I think Trump
or
will.
Sanders.
Oh, fuck me, yeah.
I don't want to, Austin.
I think Biden has a shot.
Actually, I think Biden would be a potentially.
I think he would be
candidate.
too old. I think everybody would believe he'd be too old.
And yet, everyone wants
for
to
a
run
first
Bernie.
term.
Is he older than Trump?
Huh?
Is he older than Trump?
I think so.
By about a year and a half, I think.
Right, but for a first term president,
Okay.
that's unheard of.
Yeah.
That bothers me too, because in this day and age, people live so much longer, and like.
But that's for physical reasons. That's not for mental reasons.
Yeah, the presidency is a pretty strenuous.
It's strenuous.
Job.
I'd agree
all
that
right.
we're not even comprehending properly, probably.
Right. I mean, the president of the United States has one of the hardest jobs in the world.
If Trump can do it.
No, don't go there. Please do not go there.
All right, he's not doing
boy.
it well. Okay, let's move on though. I gave you my point. That's what I think of the bill.
Okay, so as Duncan's going to point out, a lot of the provisions that help people like me last 7 years until they fade off. They do fade off. Corporations, their cuts are permanent. And while he and I disagree with what this is going to do to the economy, this is, for the first 7 years, going to look really good for you and I. Standard listener, whom I do not know. But I'm going to assume that you're going to make more money off of this, and you're going to see that as a good thing, and quite frankly, it is. I don't think Duncan and I disagree that seeing more money in your account is a bad thing.
No, I love seeing more money in my account.
Absolutely, but seeing the deficit go up and seeing the debt go up is something we do not like.
Absolutely not.
And I think, Duncan, you could agree that cutting taxes while the debt is so high is the wrong move.
So I see this as two different sides of a coin. On the one hand, I think there is a very good argument to cut spending initially.
I do believe that that's the route they should have took first.
Now,
to see what they could have took from spending so they could see what they could
Right.
move taxes to.
Now, by the same token, there is kind of I agree. As a matter of pure economics, that is by far the better option. and that should, if we were talking about an economics class, I would completely
If you were
agree.
talking from a fiscally conservative standpoint, that would be the direction you moved first.
Absolutely. The one thing we have to consider with this is also political capital. Spending cuts are, by their very nature, immensely unpopular. Now, interestingly enough, these tax cuts have not been particularly popular. I do tend to agree with the Republican majority in the sense that they will become more popular once they're actually instituted, once
I
people see a little bit more money
guarantee
in
it,
their
actually.
paychecks. I think that once all of the sort of dystopian dialogue that has surrounded this particular bill fades off, I think people are going to generally have a higher degree of support for it. So I think this may be sort of a tool to leverage to pursue spending cuts. And you know what? If that's how this is approached, if they're using this to build up sort of a political momentum to do spending cuts, I'm actually okay with this. If that is the next step in the plan and they actually execute that step, I don't have serious qualms with this because that's going to leave us with a fairly short period of time, a year or two perhaps, in which the increased budgeting aligns with decreased revenues. Now, if they either fail to pursue that or, even worse, pursue it and fail to implement it, then I'm going to have substantial problems with this, and I'm going to say that this needs to be reconsidered, because at that point we could be talking about adding, say, 5 or 10 years of decreased revenues to an already dangerously overstretched national debt. Our debt to GDP ratio continues to rise each and every year. This is a major concern specifically in this global environment. Now, with that said, are there still advantages to this even under those circumstances? I think yes. The cutting of the corporate tax rate could very well add, say, 0.8 to maybe, at an optimistic outlook, 1% growth per year, which, I mean, sounds like a very, very small amount, but actually if you're looking at it in economic terms in a mature economy where we've been doing, say, 2.5, maybe 3% growth at very good periods for the last year or so, that's actually a rather substantial addition. So there are benefits to this, but I think that the deficit addition is a very, very concerning thing, and that if I will personally not vote for any Republican in 2018 or 2020 who does not vote for spending cuts after this, because they absolutely need to make this up.
And let me just point out some pitfalls that I see for this. I see them going after Social Security much harder than they should. I agree that there needs to be reforms, particularly people are living longer.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you on that. I just think that where we draw that gray line is a little different.
I'd say raise everything about 3 years.
You know what? That's reasonable.
Raise
that
minimum
is reasonable.
retirement from 62 to 65, raise standard retirement from 65 to 68, and raise the expanded benefits that you can get by putting it off from 72 to 75. I think that would be a reasonable way of doing that. And then don't implement that for anyone who's either A, already drawing on Social Security benefits, or B, going to draw on Social Security benefits under the standard age of retirement within the next 10 years. I think if you implemented it like that, you could actually have a long-term reform of the program that wouldn't hurt anyone too badly.
I understand that from the point that they didn't put it in time for that to kick in.
Sure.
So I will accept that. What I'm saying is I think that they're going to hammer Social Security more than they should, seeing as basically a retirement program that people are forced into.
Yeah.
Which we can get into that in a different debate, because I'm sure
I have some very strong opinions
about it. What I will say is when they touch on Medicare and these other health-related services or programs, what you're doing is you're physically touching a third of our economy, and in Peoria, that's a huge part of our economy.
Yeah.
When you look at OSF and Methodist, that's a big deal, and you can't just touch these and manipulate them and expect everything to go fine. This is going to have large reverberations across our economy. Right. Not just across the country, but for us, the three of us personally, it's going to be a big deal. So when Republicans say, yeah, let's just go ahead and gut it, and I realize that they're going to approach it with more finesse than this, but when you see Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, forgive me if I think that they're not going to try and gut it.
Well, I mean, granted, I definitely fall in the camp of people who over the long term would like to eliminate Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security if I had my way about it.
Can I just interject there and say I don't think Ted Cruz and Rand Paul want to do it over the long term. They would like to do it right now.
Sure. And that, even I will admit, that would be disastrously disruptive from an economic perspective.
Absolutely. You have to be predictable as the government.
Now there are certain things in this that are going to offset that. So I mean, for example, again, the reduction of the corporate tax rate means that healthcare corporations, which almost all healthcare providers are registered as corporations, are going to have a certain degree of flexibility within the marketplace that right now they don't have. There's going to be about a 14% profit margin that's now available to them that can help them to buffer minor changes. And again, I would advocate for minor changes executed over a long period of time, because that's generally the best way to ensure some degree of economic stability when you're changing regulatory policy.
Exactly. Stability from the government is what that's what the market looks for. They need a foundation to build from.
Now, the one thing I will say with regards to this is that everyone's looking at the big welfare programs. I mean, everyone's looking at Social Security, which, as I said, I think you could alter Social Security without harming it too much. And the same with Medicare and Medicaid. Everyone's looking at those, but there are many, many smaller programs that admittedly don't consume the same resources. I mean, each one of those independently consumes almost the same amount of money as our defense budget. In fact, I think Medicare and Medicaid combined actually take up a bit more.
However, I think all three of us have qualms about how much we spend on defense.
Sure, but I'm very skeptical that the current administration is going to cut defense spending. Now, that I have to say, that is the first place I would like to see some cuts. More or less not so much in terms of how much we're spending on active personnel. I would like to see some pension reform. I mean, much like the state of Illinois, it's actually interesting. The state of Illinois and the U.S. Army have a lot in common in terms of pension obligations that are either unfunded or only partially funded. I would like to see some basic reforms to the procurement process that makes it more competitive in terms of acquiring materials and equipment for military purposes. But even getting away from the big sources of spending, there are some places that you could trim some fat. I mean, so for example, housing and urban development, the Federal Housing Administration. You could actually look at the provision of federal student loans to college students, which, as we've discussed on this program before, have considerably added to the cost of tuition over a long time, the so-called Bennett hypothesis. So I think there are several things that are more minor that you could look at for cuts that would be perhaps good starting points. But this is going to have to be a fairly vigorous ongoing process of cutting spending if we're going to make up for this. And I think if the Republican Party manages to do that, we're going to come out on the other side of this in a significantly better fiscal position. I would actually like to see some bipartisan support for this, but at the moment, I don't think the Democrats are in the mood.
And
I would like to interject.
Yeah, please do.
So, Illinois and the United States military have more in common as well, including gun deaths and
that's really dark, man.
Just overall violence.
Are you talking about like them going to war? Or are you talking about the service member suicide ratio?
Holy shit! No, I meant just like war. Like
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that
Spike Lee had that movie Chirac. Remember that?
No.
It was not well received.
I wonder why. Anyway, if you have more to say, please do.
Oh,
I feel like we've kind of
I
this
can
conversation.
I can keep hitting on that joke, but I'm done.
Okay.
Chirac joke could go on and on and on.
Duncan, please. What was the last thing you said, so I can respond to it?
That if the Republicans manage to pursue a vigorous ongoing process of spending cuts, that we could possibly come out of this in a much stronger fiscal position.
They'd have to do it in the next 6 months. I honestly believe that due to Trump not choosing his words carefully, most moderates are going to swing Democrat this election, and that's just the White House effect, isn't it?
Now, actually, can I interject something here?
Please.
In any normal political year, I would completely agree with you. The problem I see with that hypothesis at the moment is that if we look at the Democrats who have won recently, so Doug Jones in Alabama, the fellow's name isn't coming to me off the top of my head, but the person who successfully ran on the Democratic ticket for the governorship of Virginia, what we overwhelmingly find is that these are the type of moderate Democrats, comparatively moderate Democrats, who are becoming increasingly rare in Democratic primaries, where Republicans have gone up against more far left-wing Democrats. What
They've
we tend to
crushed them.
find is that usually the far left-wing Democrats seem to be winning the primary, so I'll bring in those 4 special House elections that were conducted earlier this spring or summer. And again, 4 fairly far left Democrats won their primaries and then failed to win the generals.
Can I just interject and say that Doug Jones winning in Alabama, no matter the circumstances, was quite the occasion.
Sure, I agree. But I'm just saying, honestly, I think if they had run some very far left, a Bernie Sanders acolyte, shall we say.
Okay, that's fair. If it was
think Roy Moore would currently be a senator.
Yeah, fair
or
enough.
A senator-elect, I suppose I should say.
Oh, God, I can't stand that. Okay. Different time, different place. I will talk about Roy Moore, and it probably won't be on a podcast.
But you see my point.
A lot of expletives.
You see my point where the Democrats seem to be shifting further to they're actually making the mistake that the Republicans did with the Tea Party movement going into the 2010 off-year elections, where they had very extreme members who were actually winning primaries incredibly successfully, but then when it came to the general elections, what happened was they ended up getting destroyed by the Democrats, and it delivered the Obama administration.
Right, it's because moderates tend not to vote in the primaries as much.
Correct.
And that's the case I'm going to say here. I am going to say that I hope to God, at least in the senatorial elections, it seems that Democrats have learned their lesson, even if not in the House.
I would hope.
Would you? Anyway, just for
for
the hope of these
I'd like
spending
to see
cuts
moderate Democrats, sure.
Doug Jones has gone on the record and said he would vote for the GOP.
Yeah.
Anyway, throwing all that aside, I think that senatorially, that position, the Democrats have learned their lesson. However, when it comes to grassroots campaigns, the Democrats just have to go behind the strongest candidate in the House. Even though it's a federal election, it's still small enough that grassroots campaigns can grab a hold of it, which we have seen thanks to the Tea Party. Unfortunately, God help us, that was such an awful movement. Can we all agree that was an awful movement?
It actually started out okay, but then it was kind of co-opted by the evangelical wing of the party. In its very early days, it was pretty much a hardcore fiscal concern. It had almost like right-leaning libertarian characteristics. But then it got co-opted by the evangelical movement, and it turned into Sarah Palin's dream house.
I cannot stand her either. Anyway.
Was that the name of her,
that's
show, her reality
probably
TV
the
show?
name of her Sons of Raiment for
his
second domestic violence charge, by the way. Anyway, moving back to taxes. And
she can
their
see Russia
implications
from
here.
her backyard.
I never went through the joint filings. Let's just say it's pretty decent. Honestly, it's not a bad plan as far as taxes go. For the individual, for corporations, it's far lower, which, Duncan would argue it's competitive for the world. For me, I would say it's horrible for our deficit, and that's another conversation we will probably have in the future because God knows we love to talk about the economy.
Despite having uncompetitive taxes, we do have a really great unemployment rate. That's one thing I wanted to touch on this episode.
Didn't you know it was like around 38%? That's what I heard. Thanks to our president.
Some studies show as high as 50%.
Wow, I didn't know we lived in Zimbabwe.
Cannot believe you fucking said that.
Can you really not believe that? Are you sure you can't believe that Donald Trump said that?
All right.
Are you sure?
All right, you caught me. All right. Anyway, what Paul Ryan says all the time when he talks about this bill is that it's going to help create jobs. And so listeners, 4.6% in the unemployment rate is what is generally considered full employment. And we're at 4.1% unemployment, which is far lower. And
so
I don't know.
Paul Ryan would say we're overemployed. If anything, we need to kill people.
Actually, if I can.
Okay.
That's
why they're not regulating guns. Don't you know, Bryce?
Now,
Did I go too far, Bryce?
I actually do agree that this has been a misrepresentation of the general employment statistics. One thing you do have to keep in mind, though, is that there is one compensating factor involved, which is what's known as the labor participation rate. So the unemployment rate only actually counts people who are looking actively for work within a given period of time. The labor participation rate actually counts everybody else. So people who have, for all intents and purposes, stopped looking for work. It counts, obviously, the retired, etc., children who are too young to work. Now, obviously, that has a very large share of people who are not working. But given our economy's prosperity and etc., and the number of jobs that are actually available in this country, our labor participation rate is not drastically low, but it is a bit low, particularly among certain demographics. So, I mean, for example, interestingly enough, our demographic, white males in the 18 to about 26 range, are actually disproportionately represented in the I shouldn't say unemployed, but uninvolved as far as labor participation rate goes.
Duncan, don't you know they took our jobs?
The Mexicans, right?
No,
Make America great again.
No, actually, predominantly that's people choosing not to enter the jobs that are available.
Duncan,
But my point is that there is actually...
That's because they took our jobs.
So we're not taking jobs that are available because they took the jobs that are not available anymore because they took them.
Duncan, make America great again.
MAGA!
Yeah, that's all I need.
But anyway, no. My point is that there is actually an untapped labor force that actually could potentially be brought back into the workforce. How big that is and exactly what its characteristics are, the fact of the matter, there isn't great data on it. But I did just want to bring that up in the sense that there is a compensating factor.
I gave you all
for the otherwise.
I gave you the data you needed.
Unemployment.
Anyway,
I'll get you your red hat at the end of the night, Austin.
I would burn it. Anyway, let's go ahead and find closing statements. Who wants to go first?
One thing I want to cover. I just want to cover one more thing first. The repeal of the individual mandate.
I knew you were going to bring that up. Okay, fine. Go for it.
Okay, so...
And let me just say that the President of the United States called that a soft repeal of Obamacare.
And in fairness, it actually is a repeal of the most egregious portion of it in terms of American economic freedoms. You're no longer going to be, for all intents and purposes, forced to have health insurance. But this bill does repeal the individual mandate, which again is the provision that says that one must either pay a $695 fine or a particular proportion of one's income. I think it's actually 5%. I could be mistaken about that. At the end of the tax year, if you are not registered for some form of acceptable health insurance. So that will no longer be on the table. And again, that's one of those things that it doesn't affect a huge... I mean, obviously it affects several million Americans, but as a percentage, that's not particularly large. Those people are going to actually see a fairly substantial increase in the tax refunds they get back because, if you're lower income and you're having to pay that fine, what's actually happening is it's being taken out of what would otherwise be a tax refund. So there is that element to it as well.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I agree. I don't understand why everybody's so strung up on keeping the individual mandate. Like, let's just get rid of it. It's not necessary.
The actual reason is that Obamacare doesn't work without it because it increased the risk pools to include people who otherwise would be absolutely impossible to cover through any sort of insurance scheme. So in order to do that, you had to force young, healthy people who weren't going to consume resources into it. And to do that, you had to have the individual.
We're way over time. Let's go ahead and talk closing statements. Who wants to go first? All right, I will.
All right.
So, again, I will say that until all the individual or non-corporate provisions of this bill expire, I will say this is a great thing for the average American. However, I will say after that, we're going to have to see how the economy is doing, because unless Trump is right and the U.S. turns into the only manufacturer again like it was in the 50s, this is going to hurt us in the long run. And that's about all I have to say about it. I could go further into nuance, but again, we're over time, so I'm trying to reduce it, Duncan.
So my position on this is mostly good. I am very concerned about the deficit possibilities of this, obviously. And I think that the biggest thing that everyone has to take a look at, and this applies to both sides, is that you need to have more measured expectations. Donald Trump needs to have more measured expectations of how much growth this is going to produce. As I said, somewhere between 0.8 and 1% is probably the median that you might expect. The far left probably needs to have more measured expectations of the apocalyptic Mad Max wasteland that they think we're going to be living in after the passage of this bill. Like all tax cuts, even the tax cuts in 1981 and 1986 and the Bush tax cuts in the early 2000s, which again were similarly temporary, this is going to have an impact on the economy. I think it's going to be a generally good impact, but we need to understand that the American economy is composed of so many various parts. The taxation is only one element, and one that does affect it very profoundly, but this isn't going to ultimately determine how the American economy does in the next 4 or 5 years. It's going to be one component.
Okay, I was watching Vice News, and they had the former CEO of Hardee's talk about this bill a little bit, and he was like,
And
"Yeah,
he's a wonderful man."
yeah."
Go ahead.
Are you being serious?
Go ahead.
Okay. He did like withdraw his own nomination of like being some Trump appointee. I forget. It was like Secretary of Labor.
I think, yeah, he was Labor, wasn't he? 'Cause
Yeah.
it was originally going to be the former CEO of Buffalo Wild Wings, I think. And then
Oh,
it was gonna
okay. Yeah, it was
They
gonna be
are
him.
buying
He
Buffalo
decided
Wild
not to
Wings.
do it. But anyway, he was like, yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but there are some definite pros to go along with the cons. Overall, though, everybody's gonna have a little bit more money in their pocket, so I don't really see much of a big deal with it. And then they brought on Senator Elizabeth Warren.
Oh my
Oh,
god.
Hold on.
The
Before
ultimate
Before
counterweight.
you finish, I need to take a drink.
Anyway, she had absolutely nothing good to say, and she just went on and on yelling at the guy interviewing her, telling him that it was the worst idea. All right, stop thinking of it as Democrat or Republican. It's those things are not important. It's tax cuts. All right, that's what it is. It's tax cuts. Everybody pays less taxes. Okay, that's it. That's all you need to think about.
All right. So, if you want to hear more about this, please let us know. If you want to hear more from us in general, please subscribe if you like this video.
If you want to hear less from us, please let us know.
If you
Yeah.
want to hear Austin read through all of those tax
Monotonously, yeah.
And I
tax
just
brackets
want to point
again.
out, because none of you can see what's going on, I literally just chugged beer the entire time Bryce was talking about Elizabeth Warren.
As soon as he
because
brought up
it's
Elizabeth
the
Warren.
only way I can survive, and until he stopped talking about her.
All right. And if you want to hear more from us, subscribe. I think everybody's probably said that. And if you want to see more people engage with us, please share it. Anyway, that's all that's on the mind from us tonight because we are way over time. I'm Austin.
I'm Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.